Okay, good morning guys. It's a beautiful day, so I thought I'd do this in the garden again. I've got the sun in my eyes, so I am functionally blind. So if I start pressing random buttons or can't make this work, you'll know why. Right, today we're going to look at fertilisers and what the role of fertilisers are and the elements they contain. So just to start off with a little bit of biology revision for you, a little bit of spiral learning. Let's look at some of the deficiency diseases you should know for plants. So if this will work for me. There we go. Right. So let's kick off. If we have a look at nitrogen, then this is a normal plant, and there's a nitrogen deficient plant. You can see the leaves are much more yellow. If we look at phosphorus, what can we see there? Well, you've got that purple discoloration. You've got really poor growth, particularly in the shoot there. And potassium is the last of the elements, and you can see the sort of brown discoloration, real sort of discoloration on the leaves there. So those are three deficiency diseases that hopefully you should know from biology, and those really are why we put fertilizers in the ground, is to provide the plant with those three elements. So if we have a look at the effects then, so nitrogen, you've got poor plant growth, you've got pale green or yellow leaves. In phosphorus, you've got poor plant growth, and you've got purple leaves or blue leaves or a variety of different colours, but they won't be yellow. Yellow is quite indicative of nitrogen, and you get small acidic fruit. The fruits don't grow very well. Potassium, you're getting that brown sort of edging on the leaves. The leaves curl up. You get yellowing of the veins. Poor disease resistance is what that's relates to. So those are the three essential minerals that plants need. So what we're going to look at today is really how plants absorb nutrients, know those three elements, which we've just done, and be able to look at how we make fertilisers. This is chemistry, so we're going to look at the chemistry of how fertilisers are made, and you should be able to write word and symbol equations for those reactions. So let's kick off. Why do we use fertilisers? Well, plants need essential minerals. They need those three minerals. They need nitrogen, they need phosphorus, and they need potassium, NPK. And traditionally, plants would absorb that in their roots, their root hair cells at the very tips of the roots, and they absorb dissolved minerals via a process called active transport, because they're going against the concentration gradient. There's a low concentration in the soil, you want a higher concentration in the plant, so active transport is the method they use to absorb in the root hair cells, and that's an active process that requires energy from respiration. So plants absorb those three elements. Now, because we are more intensively growing crops, we need to be replacing those elements much more quickly than nature will do for us. The nitrogen cycle is quite a slow process. So what farmers will do is they will provide the plants with those nutrients by putting down fertilisers. They'll put down extra nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. So the farmers replace those elements in the soil. Now, excuse me. That's what fertiliser does, is increases crop yield. It makes more crops in less time. It allows them to grow more quickly. And that's what farmers will do. They'll put that down. So, how do they do that? Well, what you need is a soluble salt. You need a soluble substance that can be sprinkled down as a solid, and rain will then dissolve that, and that will slowly seep into the soil, and that can be absorbed by the roots. So, these are the three elements needed. Actually, there's four. There's magnesium as well, but that's not on the spec, so we're going to ignore it. So nitrogen is used to make protein. Nitrogen is one of the main constituents of protein, and much like we need protein for growth and repair, that's what plants need it for growth and repair. So it gives them good healthy leaves, good healthy stalks. Phosphorus speeds up growth, particularly in the roots, and it helps the fruits to ripen. So one of the side effects of the phosphorus deficiency was the small acidic fruits, because they haven't ripened properly. Potassium speeds up seed growth and improves resistance to disease, so that's where you get that browning and the curling up at the edges, because they're being attacked by all sorts of things in the environment. So fertilisers need to have those elements, and if you buy a fertiliser, it will contain those three elements by and large. So this is an example here. It's an NPK fertiliser. N for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, K for potassium. And they'll have numbers on them, they'll have percentages on. So this is 777, and that's because it contains about 7% by weight of each element in there. As a slight aside, nothing to do with the spec, there are certain carnivorous plants out there, things like the Venus flytrap, and carnivorous plants have evolved because they grow in areas where there's very little natural nitrogen. Plants can't get up and walk around and get it, so how do those plants get their nitrogen? They trap insects and they dissolve the proteins that the insects create, but obviously with fertilizer they wouldn't need to do that. So, how do we make it? Well, we looked at the Harper process last time, and we looked at the manufacture of ammonia, and we said one of the major uses of ammonia is as a fertiliser. Well, ammonia is a gas, which means it's a rubbish fertiliser, because you put it in the soil, it will escape. It's also quite basic. It's quite alkaline when it's dissolved in water to make an alkali called ammonium hydroxide. That's not good for plants. So what do? Well, we actually react it with an acid. It's an alkali, or it's a base. Talk about the difference between acids and bases in Module 7, and we will look at these reactions in much more detail in Module 7, so I'm glossing over them slightly today because we're going to come back to them. But you get an acid, which is nitric acid in this case, you react it with the alkali or the base, which is ammonia, and an acid reacting with the base makes a salt. Fertilizers are salts. Why? Because they are pH 7, they are neutral, so they won't damage the soil, and they won't damage the plant, and they can be sprinkled down quite safely, and they will dissolve in water slowly and get to the roots. So we need an acid, in this case nitric acid. We react that with ammonia and make a salt called ammonium nitrate. So the word equation for this would be nitric acid plus ammonia arrow ammonium nitrate, and the symbol equation is there. Right. What about other fertilizers? Well, that ammonium nitrate is a very good fertilizer. It's got lots and lots of nitrogen in the ammonia. It's got lots and lots of nitrogen in the nitrate. But where are we going to get phosphorus and potassium from? So what I'd like to do is pause this video for a minute, and I will put these pictures. I will put these questions on Insight as well. But I'd like you to spend 20 minutes just finding out the answers to these. Pause the video, and we'll come back. Okay, I'm assuming you've all done that, or you haven't just cheekily skipped over that. Right, question 1 then. The source of nitrogen in fertilisers is ammonia. How are phosphorus and potassium sourced? Well, phosphorus we tend to get from phosphate salts. Naturally occurring rocks sometimes contain phosphates, so that's where we tend to get them from. Mined phosphate rocks, that's not a problem. Potassium we get from potassium salts. So sodium chloride is the salt that's in the sea, potassium chloride is another salt. There's loads of potassium compounds out there, so we'd source them from those there. We might use an alkali like potassium hydroxide or whatever. So question 2, write a word and balance symbol equation for the reaction to make ammonium phosphate. Right, well, very similar to how we made ammonium nitrate. You're going to use ammonia and you're going to use an acid. What acid is phosphate? It's actually phosphoric acid. So the word equation would be ammonia plus phosphoric acid arrow ammonium phosphate. I will leave you to find out what the symbol equation is, and I will ping you the answers a wee bit later on. What 2 nutrient elements are found in ammonium phosphate? Could you make that into an NPK fertiliser? Well, ammonium phosphate is going to have ammonia in, so that's got loads of nitrogen, and it's phosphate, so it's going to have phosphorus in. So you've got your N and you've got your P. What's not in there? You haven't got any K. So what do you need to do to that? You then need to add to that a potassium salt, some soluble potassium salt, potassium hydroxide. Potassium chloride would do it, but anyone would do. Right, last question then. What fertiliser would be best for crops with poor growth and yellow leaves? Explain your answer. Well, really, you're looking at a deficiency there of nitrogen primarily, yellow leaves, poor growth. So you're going to want to chuck in an ammonium salt. Ammonium nitrate would be brilliant. You might want to go down the route of ammonium phosphate because phosphorus is also involved in growth. But I think the ideal answer is ammonium nitrate because there's tons and tons of nitrogen in that compound, and we'll look at that a wee bit later. So, how do we make them? Well, how we make them is actually a required practical, and we'll do this when we come back. We'll look at this in Module 7. You will get your hands dirty doing this because learning stuff like this over the internet is a bit rubbish. So, fertilizers are salts. So we make salts by reacting an acid with a base or an acid and an alkali in a process called neutralization. You get something with a pH of less than 7, something with a pH of above 7, and then you react them together and they end up making a compound somewhere in the middle with a pH of 7, neutral. So we only react the amounts that we need. So we have to exactly neutralize it. If I add too much acid, it will be acidic. That can damage the crops and the soil. If I add too much alkali, it can damage the soil because I make the soil alkaline. So how do we do it exactly? We do a process called a titration. So let me talk you through a titration, and this is a practical we're going to do. So again, I don't expect you to remember this particularly at the moment. Before you hit any really serious exam, you will have done this practically, and you'll have done it to death. So what is a titration? A titration is a way of exactly neutralizing an acid with an alkali or an alkali with an acid. So how do we do it? Right, first things first. What we need to do is we need to get some hydrochloric acid, and we put an exactly known amount in using a bit of kit called a pipette. A proper pipette, not the little squeezy ones you use in the lab, but a proper glass pipette, and we measure out exactly 25 centimetres cubed, 25.00 centimetres cubed, and we add to that an indicator. Now, the indicator in this case we tend to use is something called phenolphthalein. It's an awesome indicator, and it goes colourless to pink. It's a brilliant endpoint. You can see it a mile away. So you add a few drops of an indicator. Now, above that is a bit of kit called a burette. Now, a burette is a very, very long tube, which is graduated. It's got 0 at the top, and it's in graduations of 1 centimetre cube going down, and that will record, or that will measure to the nearest 0.05 centimetre cubed. So it's a very precise technique, and you can very accurately measure the volume. And it's got a tap at the bottom, which means you can add dropwise. You can add bit by bit by bit. So what we do is we add exactly the right amount by adding dropwise or in very small amounts until you get that end point where it goes pink. So what we know, having done it the first time, is exactly the volume required. We get a lovely pink endpoint when the exact amount of alkali is added to neutralise it. Once we know that point, we don't need to use the indicator again because we just read the volume. We just add that volume again. So in that first titration, where we've got that pink endpoint, we know that exactly 25 centimetres cubed of sodium hydroxide was needed. So what we can do again is repeat it without the indicator. We get our 25 centimetres cubed of acid, which we measure exactly using the pipette, and we then add to that exactly the right volume of sodium hydroxide, but this time we don't need the indicator because we already know the number we need to add. So this time we add it and we get a neutral compound. This is just now containing the salt and water, and what you would then do is you would evaporate off the water very, very gently until you are left with just the salt. That's how you make a fertilizer. It's just a neutralization reaction with an acid and alkali. The fertilizer that you would use, or the acid and the alkali we use, depends on the fertilizer you want. So if you want ammonium nitrate, you use nitric acid and ammonia. If you want ammonium phosphate, you use phosphoric acid and ammonia. If you want a potassium salt, you would react something like potassium hydroxide with nitric acid, you get potassium nitrate, and you can mix those salts together to get the right amount of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium in there. And that's how we make fertilizers in a lab. Next time we're going to look at how we make fertilizers industrially, and that's a job for later on. So I'll leave you there, guys. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. It's crumb@tahs.net. But otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you all later. If I can find out how to stop it.